You are listening to No PC Allowed, aka No Political Correctness Allowed, and I am Mac Iverson. During my current events class in high school, I was always deadly silent. I never said a word, partly because the big scary world intimidated me greatly. At the same time, I was studying Henry David Thoreau, whose main theme was simplicity, clearly the opposite of the way the world operates. Here's the one Thoreau quote that I remember above all others. He said, "Life is frittered away by detail. Simplify, simplify." You've heard the expression, "I couldn't see the forest for the trees." Current events, as presented to me at that time, seemed like nothing but a bunch of unrelated details. In other words, I could see no forest or genuine perspective, only trees. The big picture often seemed missing in news stories, therefore I had little interest in the news. I was looking for something that would feed my soul, not starve it. I was seeking cohesion and deep meaning in a world that seemed full of meaningless, disjointed, and unrelated minutiae. Thoreau, by contrast, seemed to be the opposite. He was all lush, refreshing green forest, but no trees, meaning he offered no real detail. Rather, he had an overarching philosophy of life. Not only the meaning of life, but the intimate experience of life. This I chose to take seriously. Therefore, I did not grow up being well-informed. Rather, I had the smug self-satisfaction or a kind of detached snobbery about being woefully ignorant of the busy world about me. Today, little has changed. The world still seems fascinated by the drips and drabs of minutia or useless pieces of information raining down upon us all like teardrops from a great spirit who is chronically depressed. Thoreau taught me to ask the question, what benefits are the drips and drabs of useless bits of information if I can't use them in my own life? What's the possible good of getting depressed over a world that is presented to us as being impossible to change? The answer is it's not beneficial at all. In fact, is the news even real? It's my contention that about 80% of all news that filters down to the masses is either flat-out fake news or greatly distorted. And I mean funhouse mirror distortion, or even worse, totally irrelevant. What do I mean by irrelevant? The Charlie Kirk assassination, for example. Certainly the reasons for the murder are not irrelevant, but all the undue attention showered upon idiotic conspiracy theories and trying to make it sound like it's all shrouded in mystery, like the JFK assassination. But there is probably no mystery here. Why is that? The application of some common sense makes this all pretty crystal clear. A lot of talking heads are trying to make a lot of money trying to exploit this case. But unlike the murder of JFK, there was no secret cabal that just had to keep everything hush-hush. Half the country, essentially, openly hated Kirk, or what he stood for, and still does. So here's the evil genius of the deep state mafia that is controlled by the puppet masters like the George and Alex Soros crime family and their many proxies in league with China. If you finance and throw enough America and freedom-hating propaganda against the wall, enough will stick so that the very stupidest members of our very sick Western society will want to become the moral heroes who have the guts to knock out the next up-and-coming Adolf Hitler and save the world from the oppressive right-wing extremists like Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump. So these pawns become willing to sacrifice their cheap, crumpled-up, throwaway lives to help stuff more money into the pockets of the billionaires and make them exponentially more powerful. It is the perfect scam. The puppet masters are never fingered for guilt. Let some low IQ, low life, useful idiot loser take the bullet for them instead. Hey, they don't really matter anyway. And you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Let society's biggest losers take the rap, while the oligarchs pop the cork on another bottle of Bollinger champagne in grand style celebration on board their Heeson yachts anchored in Monte Carlo. That, my friend, is exactly how the deep state mafia in partnership with China operates. And that is precisely what I mean by all the hand-wringing over the Kirk assassination being irrelevant news. Think about the massive percentage of news that is completely wasted because no one else in the podcast world is willing to be as simply and cleanly honest as I am being right now. Look no further than that lying sack of garbage, Candace Owens. All fake information, almost all irrelevant information. Talk radio and podcasts closely mirrors news that is filtered down through the Associated Press. This is a conglomerate news agency that is controlled by a board of directors who are highly biased and influenced by highly motivated parties. So what is deemed as newsworthy is actually pre-filtered in a way that lines the pockets of those with money and power to make things happen. Now, you may think that the mere reporting of news could not possibly be that slanted. I mean, come on. A news story can be a sentence long. How can the truth be hidden in that? Good question. The hiding is in the non-reporting. Censorship means silence. In sales, shutting you up or censoring you comes with a slight twist. It's known as deflection. If a prospect asks a salesman a difficult question, the salesman often gives a terse answer and then quickly pivots and changes the subject. The prospect simply gets confused and quickly forgets his original hesitation, making the sale that much easier. Slippery politicians use this trick too. It's a clever way of shutting you up, of censoring you. The main job of a news organization is to convince you that they are the experts. What they say goes. That's why it's extremely difficult to feel empowered when listening to the news. The idea they convey is that you are a victim of what they present, and there's nothing you can do about it. This rant may make it seem as though I am anti-capitalist. I am not, but that doesn't mean that I'm okay with liars, especially when it's lying on a grand global scale. News is like the weather, constantly changing, while not really changing at all, because everything, it seems, moves in cycles. History repeats itself. This is especially true when the lessons history teaches are never fully learned. To gain traction in this fractured world, an understanding of the ultimate issues is paramount. This is far and away more important than the news. But how we perceive ultimate issues can be wide open and confusing because if there is no strong, truthful foundation for understanding, then humanity can easily be dragged down into never-ending confusion. I've said this many times, and I will keep saying it. America is confused because the bride of Christ, or the church, is confused. Any foundation of any institution that does not have every word of the Bible at its core of understanding will quickly crack and crumble away like a house built upon sand. Certain truths are resisted sometimes for decades, even centuries. So alternate universes are created from the illusion of believing that your side is right simply because you get spoon-fed propaganda. This is especially and absolutely true on the left, where there's no truth at all. That's why the left has become so divorced from reality, totally and completely divorced from everything real. In case you have not noticed, the woke have driven themselves completely mad. They are as separated from reality as the Nazis were. And I'm not just talking about just any old Nazi. I'm talking about the Nazis who kicked women down into the dirt. Nazis who stripped babies out of their mother's arms and kicked them around in the dirt like they were footballs. I'm talking about that kind of Nazi. That's what we have in America today. Look no further than that airhead, a-hole, pervert, loser who murdered Charlie Kirk. That same hateful mindset is infused throughout the West today. If this idea seems totally false to you, might I suggest that you have allowed yourself to become too well informed on things that aren't really true at all? Or maybe you've become overly attached to the news that the deep state desperately wants you to see. This is exactly what the Nazis did to the German people. When we separate ourselves too much from obvious, visceral truth, the kind we feel in our gut, that which comes quickly and automatically, but when we stop to pause and remember our fear first, rather than our righteous outrage, an outrage that is Bible-based, that is, if we ever learned it in the first place, when we separate ourselves too much from that righteous truth, then we are in deep, deep trouble. Today, this is often displayed with the impulse to immediately whip out your camera and record a woman being attacked, oftentimes with hopes of selling it to a news outlet for some big money, when, in days of old, men especially would immediately rush out to protect the lady with no thought of their own safety. This same dehumanization is what happened in Nazi Germany. Jew-hating propaganda or fake news was everywhere. This allowed for Jews to be openly mocked and humiliated on the streets for all to see. For example, some Jews were randomly stopped on the street by Nazis who shaved their beards in order to degrade their Jew identity and devotion to God. This was often done with knives and always against their will. Some were forced into comically humiliating positions and then forced to smile really big for the camera, or they would have been beaten or murdered on the spot, right there on the crowded streets. That cruelty shocked and cowed Germans into remaining passive. In addition, the Nazi salute was used not to show support for Hitler, but for a minority of Nazis to identify nonconformists, the courageous, intelligent, non-fearful ones. As soon as they were spotted for refusing to return the Sieg Heil salute or say Heil Hitler, they were shipped off to concentration camps. That is how the Nazis were able to get over 90% of the people to return that satanic gesture or something like it, thus creating the illusion of mass harmonious support for the Nazis when it did not exist at all. The Germans were simply a fearful people. The Nazi salute became a deeply meaningful power grab. Today, woke pronouns are identical to this gimmick. If you refuse to use some insane pronoun, then you instantly identify yourself as an enemy of the neo-Nazi woke. And that will not be tolerated. It is verboten. Or, how dare you call me a he or a she? I'm a they. You should know better. In other words, if you obey their insane commands, you become insane. And that is exactly how Germany so quickly descended into madness and into a pit of hell on earth. So you see, history just keeps repeating itself because people forget its lessons so quickly. This is especially true for the masses of ignoramuses who never even learned history. Please listen to this. History is an ultimate issue. It includes the news, but it is much more than just the news. News can change like the weather. The truth never does. Ultimate issues never do. That is what makes them ultimate, meaning of the utmost importance. The Holy Spirit has given humanity the ability to discern if we but ask for it. James 1:5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But if we expose ourselves too much to something that deadens the senses because it overpowers the senses too much, graphic violent entertainment and pornography are two prime examples, when this happens, we deaden God's gift to us. It's called simple discernment. You could call it a built-in bullshit detector. But believing in too many lies overwhelms and overpowers God's gift to us. So what should be easily and quickly viewed as horrific gradually becomes tolerated and then fully accepted, and then enthusiastically embraced to the point where everyone on earth must share our viewpoint, or else nothing in our lives will seem right. This is where the woke Nazis find themselves today. Hitler was able to do this to the German people. Mass formation psychosis was the result. But that kind of insanity doesn't have to be radical left-wing or right-wing. It can be what I call a kind of milquetoast moderate viewpoint, which always excuses inaction in us. There's a very common, very flawed psychology that says, well, I don't like the extreme right and I don't like the extreme left, therefore the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But that Overton window is always shifting. What was considered crazy far left just 2 decades ago is now considered mainstream. How did this happen so fast? Well, the news shifted. The proudly well-informed became the useful idiots who simply parroted back what they saw on the evening news. There's a kind of good old boy network that tends to take over when people rely too much on human relationships instead of truth-seeking. Especially in areas of truth-telling, there should be not too much familiarity between fellow pundits, because this tends to act as a governor that limits true, honest expression. For example, if I'm well known in the community, I may limit my controversial opinions simply because everyone knows me. I will likely control those passions because I don't want my reputation or career to become threatened. Because of this, there is a society-killing groupthink that sadly follows us wherever we go. This is why anonymous speech is so vital to a healthy republic. This is why letters to the editor, even if anonymous, and flyers from people we may not even know are so vital to preserving our First Amendment right to free speech. And always remember, our Second Amendment to the right to bear arms helps guarantee our first. Our gun rights are there to mostly intimidate our government from becoming too big for its britches, like Hitler's Germany or the mullahs of Iran, both of which fiercely went after gun ownership. Censorship of opinions goes way back and is as old as humanity. Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, and many others used pseudonyms to prevent this censorship and to advance their causes. American patriots and founders, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, and Thomas Paine all used pen names. These are the ones who did not feel safe presenting the truth because unpopular opinions were kind of taboo, especially at the founding of our country. Having an unpopular opinion could get you hanged. But taboo does not mean wicked. Many taboos are truly wicked. But it usually simply means that moneyed interests are threatened by better ideas And so they want to suffocate those ideas in the cradle before they grow too big. In a healthy, free society, no topic for discussion should ever be taboo. Stupid ideas will be openly debated, and the sooner they are shot down, the more likely they are to remain buried in the grave where they belong. And that's always a good idea. Otherwise, stupid ideas fester and grow into socialist, fascist, communist rot, like is happening in the Western world today. That's because bad ideas have been protected and coddled by the evil of political correctness for many decades. Censorship is as old as human communication, wanting to block out things that threaten us psychologically with cognitive dissonance, or restricting speech that would cause us to feel depressed and sad because too many of us believe in lies. Lies that have been advanced simply because they line the pockets of the rich and powerful. And the rich and powerful have always been on the prowl like a ravenous lion, looking for idiot cultures to use and abuse. Black culture has allowed itself to become ensnared and debased by a woke idiotology, which really does not belong to that culture. Many blacks are very conservative, but far too many will not vote that way. That is because the civil rights movement was thoroughly interwoven into the detailed fabric of their lives like a deadly virus. It first infected the church, which has always been very conservative. The civil rights movement then quickly diluted the integrity of black families. Big government became Big Daddy by replacing real daddies. Intergenerational poverty and crime became the logical results. How did this happen so quickly? Recently, I was listening to a conservative talk show host, and he was happy to relate how an aggregate news collection service offered an AI summary of all opinions of podcasts and news reports. Minus this one, no PC allowed, of course, being that we are so heavily shadow banned. But the ad boasted about how awesome it is that you only get the news and opinions that you want to hear. But obviously, if people just look at what they want to see, and only a moron sees only what he wants to see, instead of what really is, then nothing will ever improve in this world. With a bunch of frightened idiots walking around everywhere with horse blinders on, that's how we got to this point to begin with all this insane cultural division. Because of civil rights, black culture adapted a deadly victim mentality on a massive scale because their churches went all in on favoring leftist politics over God's word. They willingly and enthusiastically became the victims of the white boogeyman. The segregation that comes from artificial intelligence makes it all much worse. It's similar to the technology of ads chasing ads. Let's say you like cats. Other companies want to sell you their cat stuff too. So you get another ad about cats, and then another, and another, and another. Before you know it, you got cats scratching and pawing their way out of your yazoo. Oh, if it were only that innocent. But if you want only news and opinions extolling the grand virtues of socialism, then you get to live in that bubble, and the whole world seems insane if they don't stream the same brainwashing junk that you do. The world only seems completely mad, but no, you're the crazy one if you love socialism. That simply means you never studied real history. If you don't know the lessons of history, you are doomed to repeat the massive deadly mistakes of evil socialism over and over again. And if enough useful idiots buy into this socialism obsession, it will become a national nightmare from which we may never awaken. This is where America sadly finds itself today. Big tech billionaires created this monster of division, and they did it on purpose, fully knowing how it would all play out. The big question is, why? They did it to seize maximum control away from you and your family and hoard it for themselves. It all starts out sounding perfectly reasonable. Again, big tech's attitude is the following. You saw this ad online, so now we want to target you with similar ads. And target is an interesting word if you think about it. You become the target. You're a target, you're a target. Well, if everybody's a target, then America becomes a giant target. And we have the ad makers or the people with the money who want to influence or target all of us. And once they get us, they certainly don't ever want to lose us as customers. And being a customer means you can be a customer for anything you can imagine for the rest of your life, which makes them tremendously successful. And it has a name. It's called never-ending residual income. Plug and play, set it, and forget it. Therefore, we must stay in their target area, which means nothing changes, conceivably, forever. By the way, this is not theory. This is our current reality. and it is getting worse by the nanosecond. If people are trained by advertisers to only see what they want to see, which is our natural inclination anyway, then nothing will ever change, which means everyone remains divided or separate from each other forever. That's right, I said forever. Let me ask you, once firmly in place, how could that ever change? It can't. Now, who in their right mind wants to live in a country like that? Who in their bloody right mind wants to live in a country that is always divided and, as AI is perfected, becomes even more divided and separated from reality? If you can create your own virtual reality, then by definition, you are actually dead. You become just like the living dead, actually dead. How is that? Because life's rules no longer apply to you. That is how I define death. Forever living, or to be more accurate, forever being dead, in a segregated bubble is simply narcissism run amok. We can end up being surrounded by other people, but lost inside aimless, lonely, floating bubbles, just like us. We can never transcend anything this way. We become even more unchanging through the adoption of AI technologies to cement and guarantee that nothing ever really changes in this country. Isn't that the very worst thing for America right now? Isn't that the very worst thing? So obviously, we need to start talking about this more and more. You are listening to one of the most severely shadow banned podcasts on earth due to truthful content alone. That is because the deep state hates the truth. I threaten their power and their money, and that is why they censor me. Regardless, be sure to subscribe, give us a thumbs up or 5 stars, write a review, and share. Do it now while it's fresh in your mind. You've been listening to No PC Allowed. I am Mac Iverson.